In the first two segments of this film, you have seen the history of the John Birch Society and its organizational structure. You have also seen that the John Birch Society, in spite of the attempts of the communists to destroy it, has grown to be the largest organization in the world, which is actively opposing the communist conspiracy. The next logical question is, what basic philosophic beliefs and principles have set the John Birch Society on this collision course with the international communist conspiracy? To answer that question, we should take a brief look at the political spectrum. Most political analysts and political scientists place communism on the far left of the political spectrum. Communism, by definition, is total government, which utilizes a socialist economy. Therefore, by definition, Nazism must also be placed on the far left, since it was and is totalitarian government and a socialist economy. Still, by definition, fascism must be placed on the far left, as it was characterized by totalitarian government and a semi-socialist economy. Thus, the left is characterized by totalitarian governments, and these governments are able to maintain their control over the people by the utilization of a socialist economy. Looking now to the far right, what is the antithesis of total government? No government at all, or anarchy. So on the left we have total government. On the right we have no government. Obviously, the John Birch Society does not support anarchy, and it most assuredly opposes totalitarian governments. So then, we are seeking the proper amount of government to maintain an orderly society and still guarantee a maximum amount of individual freedom and integrity. Freedom, of course, requires responsibility. No one can maintain their personal freedom unless they are responsible, unless they are willing to assume the responsibility for their own welfare, their own conduct, and that of their families. A historical review of previous societies, cultures, and civilizations leads us to one basic conclusion. Man's freedom is inversely proportionate to the quantity of government, and the maintenance of his freedom is directly proportionate to his own responsibility and that of his fellow men. Therefore, individual freedom and integrity hinge upon two basic factors: limited government and increased responsibility. As any society settles into a semi-permanent pattern of economic and political life, more and more leisure time is available to its citizens. Historically, this is when the drive always begins to have government become the management of social action, rather than society's agent for certain clear purposes. Government is then increasingly allowed, invited, and even urged to do planning for and exercise control over the total economy of the nation. Next, government is pushed and pushes itself more and more into planning and control of the separate activities of the citizens and groups that make up the economic life of the nation. Actually, no government short of being omniscient can ever take into account all of the variables involved in the division of labor, production, and the changing desires of the human race, nearly as well as the appraisal and resulting corrections which would be accomplished by a completely free market, if given the opportunity. For the free market automatically weighs, measures, and integrates into its decisions all factors relative to supply and demand as they relate to labor, commodities, and prices. It is interesting to note that in any society, the government and its allies, who always claim the justification that society's economy is more complex than those which preceded it, and therefore insist on planning and controls, never realize how futile and harmful these controls have been shown to be in the past. Of course, exactly the opposite is true. The more complex the economic life of a nation becomes, then the more impossible and ridiculous is any undertaking to plan and control these relationships, and the more the automatic working of a completely free market is needed. An economy which is left free to function for the benefit of all citizens inevitably produces a strong middle class. But as government increases in power, it always has a tendency to squeeze out the middle class, to destroy or weaken the middle for the benefit of the top. Therefore, the form of government is not nearly as important as its quality, and neither the quality or form are as important as its quantity. We are in complete agreement with Thomas Jefferson's statement that government is best which governs least. Our founding fathers fully understood this basic concept. Therefore, the Constitution of the United States was carefully structured so as to restrict and limit the quantity of government. By establishing a constitutional republic rather than a monarchy or democracy, the Founding Fathers gave us the best form of government. The quality of government will always be determined by the character and integrity of those elected to administer it. But our founding documents carefully limited the quantity of government so that it could not be used to plan and control the economy, thereby destroying individual freedom. In the last 60 years, however, there have been powerful forces working to change the form of government from a constitutional republic into a democracy, thereby opening the door to increase the quantity of government. Simultaneous with these conspiratorial moves, there has been a degeneration in the quality of government, thus accelerating the destruction of a free market and a free people. In 1913, the establishment of a central banking system, the creation of a graduated personal income tax, and changing the method of election of United States senators laid much of the groundwork for this destruction. By the involvement in 2 great world wars and several regional wars, the federal government created the excuses for increasing taxation and instituting government controls over the economy, including the production of essential commodities. At the same time, many decisions by the United States Supreme Court have aided in centralizing the power of the federal government in the executive branch. This entire degenerative process has been pushed by the executive branch of government, given fantastic assistance by the judicial branch, approved, tolerated, and financed by the legislative branch. At this point in our history, therefore, the checks and balances which our Founding Fathers built into the Constitution have been severely damaged. If allowed to continue, this process inevitably leads to dictatorship. The obvious solution to this problem is less government and more responsibility. The stated goals of the John Birch Society are precisely that: to create an era of less government and more responsibility in which, with God's help, we can build a better world. It is imperative that the American people understand the basic and underlying principles that allowed our nation and its people to rise to such great heights in man's progress. It is also necessary to understand the satanic conspiratorial forces which are attempting to destroy that progress. Therefore, the John Birch Society, a non-profit educational organization, was founded to create understanding of these principles and to inspire the individual to retain his freedom to make his own bargain with life, and to assume the responsibility for the results of that bargain, and that means are as important as the ends in the civilized social order which he desires. This is the true principle of the Americanist, and it is in total contrast to the principle of the communist and collectivist, who believe that a collectivist society should swallow up all individuals, make their lives and their energies completely subservient to the needs and the purposes of the collectivist state, and that any means are permissible to achieve this end. So the collectivist philosophy would crush the individual to create the utopian society. But the Americanist philosophy, believing that a divine creator endowed man with an upward reach, leaves the individual free to serve both divine creator and his fellow man. The results of the 2 philosophies are dramatically demonstrated as one examines the destruction and terror that always must exist within communist countries, compared to the freedom, progress, happiness, and achievement which characterizes a free nation. Throughout history, as man has struggled for freedom, each generation has had to make its decision to contend for this freedom. We are at a point in our own history and in our own lives when we as individuals must make that decision. This decision cannot be made by an entire civilization, nor can it be made by groups within a culture. It must be made by individuals. When our country was founded, it was individuals such as Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and others who made the decisions for their own lives that finally determined the course of history. Which decision will you make? Are you willing to take the path of least resistance and not oppose this conspiracy which is devouring mankind? Or are you willing to stand upon your moral convictions and your humane principles in order to preserve and improve the greatest civilization that has yet existed on this earth? Of course, the easiest thing to do is to rationalize the problem away, to convince yourself that the problem has been exaggerated and that it really does not exist to the extent that has been described in these films. You can do that if you wish. You can create all sorts of excuses as to why you should not oppose this conspiracy. But if indeed you do choose this path, then at the same time you should realize that by not opposing this satanic evil, you have in reality become an accomplice to it, because you are willing to stand idly by and watch as your fellow men are consumed by it. The history of the communist conspiracy is filled with horror and terror, almost beyond description or belief. Literally millions have been murdered by the communists in order to solidify their power. Millions of others have been tortured and brutalized in the most inhumane manner possible. Mothers and fathers have been forced to watch while their children die screaming in agony. Missionaries, priests, and nuns have been crucified on the walls of their churches. Thousands of others have been locked inside their churches and the buildings set on fire. The atrocities of the communist butchers all over the world are almost beyond numbering and description. If in reality you can accept the course of no resistance to this conspiracy, then we really have no appeal to you anyway. On the contrary, if you resolve within your own mind to dedicate part of your life, your fortune, and sacred honor to the destruction of this conspiracy and the building of a better world, then through membership in the John Birch Society, we offer you the association, assistance, and cooperation of the finest body of men and women on the earth. We offer you the structure and mechanics of the most formidable force opposing the communist conspiracy. We offer you a proven, successful plan to defeat the insiders who run this conspiracy. We offer you the leadership of dedicated men and women at every level in this structure. In addition to the leadership of Mr. Welch, there is that of the John Birch Society Council, the top advisory body in matters of organization and policy. The council represents a cross-section of professions, occupations, and interest in American life. The leadership of any organization reflects the true character of that organization. With great pride, we invite you to review the brief biographical sketches of each member of the John Birch Society Council, which is contained in the brochure, Responsible Leadership Through the John Birch Society. The members of the John Birch Society Council are excellent examples of our qualitative goals for members in the John Birch Society. Merely being patriotic or anti-communist is not sufficient qualification for membership. We must have associated with us, now and in the future, only men and women of good will, good conscience, and religious ideals. For we are striving to set an example by dedication, integrity, and purpose, in word and deed, which our children's children may follow without hesitation. You are not required to form an organization and to experience the agonies of growth, nor do you need to stand alone, but rather you can be assured that through your membership in the John Birch Society, every ounce of energy and every dollar you dedicate to this battle will be used in concert with that of tens of thousands of others, and in the most effective manner possible. Just as a drum by itself provides little more than noise, but when part of an orchestra provides the necessary rhythm. This principle of concerted action is very important. The communists have been very successful in creating many issues, and they really don't care how many people oppose them as long as they can scatter their opposition and keep that opposition divided, all working on different issues and using different tactics. The only thing that the communists fear is a concerted action program that would totally expose the conspiracy. To illustrate, we can return to our example of a concert orchestra. As we compare this orchestra, while it is tuning its instruments to the same orchestra playing a beautiful symphony, we notice that all of the musicians are still playing their individual instruments. They are all playing different notes, but they are playing in concert, and that is the difference. Another excellent illustration is a football team. A football team is composed of 11 men. All 11 men are playing different positions, and each has a different responsibility. But when that team works as a unit, and each individual member performs his own responsibility, then it is successful, either offensively or defensively. But if each man operated without direction and called his own plays, there would be nothing but chaos, and the team would surely lose to its opponents. But a football team that is well coached, and one that is in good physical condition, and the men well trained, each responsible for his own activities and yet conforming to the overall game plan, that team will win over its opponents. And the basic principle is, of course, concerted action. This is why your membership in the John Birch Society is important. You can be sure that all of your efforts are in concert with tens of thousands of others, and that each project in which you are asked to participate is one which will have a devastating effect on the communist conspiracy. An examination of the strategy and tactics of the John Birch Society will also illustrate the integral part you can play as a member. Mr. Welch has repeatedly said, "Education is our total strategy, and truth is our only weapon." The strategy of education, of course, requires a means of communication with the American people. So the morality of the means to achieve an end must be discussed as a prelude to any discussion of strategy. The John Birch Society believes that means are as important as ends in any civilized society. Of all of the falsehoods that have been so widely and deliberately circulated about the John Birch Society, none is so viciously untrue as the charge that it is willing to condone foul means for the sake of achieving praiseworthy ends. The Society believes that communism, as a way of life, is completely wrong, but its ultimate quarrel with the communists is that they insist on imposing that way of life on the rest of the world by murder, treason, and cruelty, rather than by persuasion. Even if our own use of force ever becomes necessary and morally acceptable because it is in self-defense, we must never lose sight of the legal, traditional, and humanitarian considerations of a compassionate civilization. The communists recognize no such compulsions, but this very ingredient of amoral brutishness will help to destroy them in the end. A humane civilization dictates the postulate that the means to achieve an end must be as moral as the end itself. In order to devise its strategy, the John Birch Society has determined that each member of the society will directly influence 9 other individuals and indirectly influence 90 other persons. Therefore, a ratio of influence of 1 to 100 is established. Keeping that ratio in mind, now observe the makeup of a congressional district. According to the United States Census Bureau, the average congressional district is composed of 465,000 citizens, of whom 298,000, or 64 1/10%, are of voting age. Only 206,000 are actually registered voters, and only 165,000 of those persons actually vote. This is 35 6/10% of the total population of the average congressional district. The plan of the John Birch Society is to place a coordinator within each congressional district and a major coordinator in each state. This would mean a total of 435 coordinators plus 50 major coordinators. Based on previous experience, this would develop an average of 1,000 members of the society within each congressional district. Now, relating that to the 1 to 100 sphere of influence ratio, you can quickly see that within each congressional district, you would have 10,000 people who were directly influenced by those same members. The Society uses congressional districts as measuring units for 2 reasons. First, they are reasonably uniform in population, which states, cities, counties, and other geographical divisions are not. And second, because this suggests at once the ultimate underlying support which the educational campaigns of the Society might provide for conservative candidates of any and all parties in the political field. It should be emphasized again that the John Birch Society is not and will never become a political organization. But responsible political action can be developed only when a solid foundation of education has been established. Thus, the educational efforts of the Society will eventually be reflected in political results. And this is one of the primary reasons why your membership in the John Birch Society is so very important. You have your own sphere of influence. You influence people that do not have contact with other members of the Society. Each member of the Society plays a very important and strategic role which cannot be fulfilled by anyone else. You, as an individual, are a very important person, and as a member of the John Birch Society, you can utilize your personal influence in a concerted action program to the maximum possible degree. At the close of this film, your host will give you an application for membership in the John Birch Society. We ask you to give serious and penetrating thought to this decision. But as you make this decision, think of the answer that will be required of you by future generations. This is not a decision to join an organization. This is a moral decision as to whether or not you will oppose that which is evil, and support with all your heart and might that which is right. In founding the John Birch Society, Robert Welch said, "Communism has its weaknesses, and the communist conspiracy has its vulnerable points. We have many layers of strength not yet rotted by all of the infiltration and political sabotage to which we have been subjected. Our danger is both immense and imminent, but it is not beyond the possibility of being overcome by the resistance that is still available. All we must find and build and use to win is sufficient understanding. Let's create that understanding and build that resistance with everything mortal men can put into the effort, while there still is time. Then, while we are destroying, and after we have destroyed the communist tyranny, let's drive on towards our higher goals of more permanent accomplishment, towards an era of less government and more responsibility, in which we can create a better world." Now that you have had the opportunity to get an insight into the John Birch Society, you can easily see that we can make this educational army big enough, extensive enough, and effective enough with the powerful weapon of truth to win this new kind of war against the conspiracy we face. And we can do so in time, but only if enough people rapidly realize the size of the job, its urgency, and its importance. And we hope you are among those who do. As your host discusses the society and further answers your questions, you will be making a decision that will affect your own life and that of your children and their children. This world will soon pass into the hands of the next generation. The condition in which they receive it is your responsibility.